With manufacturing and technological advances over the past few years, the amount of specialized fly lines on the market can get overwhelming real quick. Today, we'll go over 6 fly line characteristics that should make selecting the perfect fly line a whole lot easier. Number 1 is the weight. So if we wanted to get a little bit technical, maybe dive into the weeds a little bit, we would distinguish them in terms of grains. So X number of grains equals a 1 weight, X number of grains equals a 2 weight, X number of grains equals a 3 weight. But over the years, with a variety of different line manufacturers and personal preference coming into play, grains have gotten a little bit messy. So to simplify things, we can actually disregard grains altogether and just focus on the weight, and that's gonna make things really easy. So a 1 weight line is made to cast a 1 weight rod. A 2 weight line is made to cast a 2 weight rod, and so on. And so this brings up a common question. Let's say you just picked up a brand new 5 weight rod, but you have some 4 weight line on a reel laying around. Can you cast that 4 weight line on a 5 weight rod? Yes. It just might not be a super enjoyable experience. Generally, if you underweight that rod, so just like in our example, if I use 4 weight line on a 5 weight rod, that rod isn't gonna bend enough, and so more effort is needed, especially on short casts. Once you have a lot of line out of that rod, there's enough mass to bend that rod and make the casts. But if you're casting at short distances, you're gonna have to put in a lot more effort. And then if we go the opposite way and I overweight a fly rod, so let's say I use a 6 weight line on my 5 weight, the rod becomes slower, meaning it loads a bit more and I've got to wait longer on the back cast. And this might cause issues with casting far away. And so long story short, if I want to maximize the performance of both my fly line and my fly rod, I'm going to match the weight of that fly line to the weight of my rod. All right, characteristic number 2 is taper. When something is tapered, it simply means a gradual progression from thick on one end to thin on the other. In fact, when you look at the entire fly fishing setup as a whole, it's tapered thick to thin. The rod is tapered, the fly line is tapered, the leader is tapered, and this taper allows for energy to be transferred in the most efficient way possible. From the rod, through the fly line, and down the leader, ultimately sending our fly out to the target. And when I say energy transfer, I want you to immediately think of turning over that fly line or completely straightening out that fly line, leader, and tippet. And when it comes to fly line, there are 2 general taper designs. Number 1 is double taper, or you'll see it on boxes as DT. This type of fly line does have limited uses, but it's a good place to start our discussion. And as the name implies, a double taper has 2 tapers. It has a rear taper, so one in the back, and then it has a belly, which is the thickest part of the fly line. It's the mass of the fly line. It's pretty consistent throughout the entire line. And then we have a front taper. And then the second type of fly line that we have is weight forward. And this is by far the vast majority of fly lines. And so we have our backing that's attached to our fly line. And then there's a section of running line, a rear taper, a belly, which is that mass, the thickest part of the fly line, and that's positioned more to the front of the line, and then we have a front taper. And so just to clarify one more time, with a double taper, the thickest part of the fly line, that mass, is pretty consistent throughout the entire line, versus a weight forward, that mass, the thickest part of the fly line, is positioned towards the front of the line. And so each of these types of fly line has their pros and cons. With a double taper, the pros are improved accuracy. That fly line is more stable in the air. It's easier to roll cast. With more of that belly on the water, you're able to have better mending control. You can cast dry flies with a more delicate presentation. And something pretty unique about a double taper fly line is, let's say you use that front taper, you use it for a while, it starts to crack, it gets a little dirty. You can actually take that fly line off, flip it around, and use the rear taper, and it's exactly the same as the front taper. So you've actually doubled the lifespan of your fly line. And so with this list, you're probably saying, well, why would I want to use anything else? This sounds amazing. It does have its cons. Double taper fly lines, you can't cast them as far, so decrease distance. It has limited wind resistance, and you're gonna have issues turning over larger flies. And so double taper fly lines are great for delicate, short range dry fly fishing. Now let's talk about the pros and cons of the most common type of fly line, weight forward. The pros, increased distance. You're able to cast this line a lot further. It's able to carry larger flies to target. You're able to load that rod with minimal false casts, and you have greater wind resistance. And then the cons, you have decreased delicacy. So unless you're fishing really small, delicate dry flies, the weight forward line is going to be used in the vast majority of situations. Now, before we dive into the weeds on this, let me be very clear. There are fly lines for every scenario and every situation under the sun. For example, let's say a manufacturer wants to make a specialized streamer line. They'll take that front taper and they'll shorten it and they'll make it heavier. And that's gonna allow for that fly line to turn over those bigger, heavier streamers. I'll just throw this out there. I've been fly fishing for close to 20 years now, mostly for trout. And about 95% of that time, I've used just a standard weight forward fly line without any issues. Now, don't get me wrong. Specialized fly lines, they have their place, especially if you're going after really big fish or fishing saltwater, or even if you're not and you just want to have a fly line for every single specific situation. That's awesome. Just personally, I prefer to keep things simple. So as a beginner, if I had my standard 9-foot 5-weight rod, I would pick up a box of fly line that was WF5F. WF for weight forward, 5 for 5-weight because I'm pairing it with my 5-weight rod, and F for floating, which is what we're going to talk about next. Characteristic number 3, density. When it comes to density, fly line falls into 3 categories. The most common is floating. As the name suggests, it floats completely, which usually brings up a common concern. What if I want to fish nymphs and streamers under the water's surface? Do I need to get a different fly line? No, your fly line floats on the water, but your leader and flies can sink. Your fly line just acts as an anchor point on the surface. And so this is the most popular, the most used, the most versatile type of fly line. And so if you only have one fly line, floating is the way to go. Sinking fly line, as the name suggests, sinks completely. And so you use this for still water, so deep lakes, you want to get it down 20 to 30 feet deep. Yes, you can fish lakes and ponds with floating fly line. You might just have to extend your leader a little bit. It's when you're getting into that 15, 20, 30 feet deep where the sinking fly line might come in handy. And then we get into the intermediate fly lines, which could be something like a sink tip line where part of the line is floating and then the last little tip section sinks. And this helps for situations when you need to get streamers and nymphs down to a certain depth that just isn't possible with a pure floating fly line. All right, characteristic number 4 is length. This is pretty simple. Most fly lines are about 80 to 100 feet in length, and it's just based off of manufacturer's preference. Fly line characteristic number 5 is color. The color of your fly line is more personal preference than anything. Yes, you will have anglers argue that a more neutral colored fly line will blend in or camouflage with the water. I have a hard time believing it makes that big of a difference. And if your fly line is on top of fish, that shadow or that silhouette from the fly line, it's probably gonna spook the fish a lot faster than the color of the fly line itself. Fly line characteristic number 6 is a welded loop. Most fly lines these days come with a welded loop on it. This makes it really easy to switch out leaders using a loop-to-loop connection or handshake. But if your fly line doesn't have a welded loop, all you have to do is learn the nail knot and you're in business. So a welded loop, it's more convenience than anything. Once you decide which fly line is right for you, the next component in our fly line system is a leader. This is one of the most overlooked pieces of fly fishing gear and something that anglers mess up all the time. You will not want to miss talking about it in the next video.